Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Dystopian societies are the opposite of perfection. As works of fiction, they help us reflect on the imperfection of humanity and our environment. That's why in today's video I wanted to discuss my thoughts and opinions on some of the dystopian fiction books that I have and give you some of my perspectives so you can analyze them as well. Dystopian stories present us with through their collective philosophies and political systems. They show us not only the darkness of the human heart with a picture of how the members of these societies perceive these failures, but also their opinions about their past and the gloom of their future. As a result, we see totalitarian states that have promised liberation and universal happiness, but instead they doomed their societies into chaos and disparity. So you might ask yourself, why would I read these books given their pessimism? Well, think about it. Dystopian societies in these books become a failure because of the many elements they share and have in common. We see things like famine, oppression, and technologies that promise to liberate the working masses, but instead they just increase the wealth gap between classes and opportunities. That is exactly the reason why these books are so important, because they are thought-provoking, and by so they can trigger positive changes in our attitude towards how we see our world and what we can learn from them, so our societies in our time do not become failures as well. And with that out, I need to start with Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. And let's start with the fact that Brave New World is set as a technocracy, but in reality is just a benevolent dictatorship. The book opens up showing you how the inhabitants of this world are human clones producing large batches in a lab managed by the scientists. The concept of a human life here feels more like mass production in a factory than anything else. Because of this process, they are genetically manipulated and divided into groups given different traits and characteristics. So everything since their conception is modified to conform each group to a particular class. But despite all this genetic alteration, humans lack individuality and they live a somber, shallow life where happiness is substituted by meaningless experiences like promiscuous relationships and the use of certain drugs. And as we meet certain characters, we see how they show their constant state of dissatisfaction and the limitations to express themselves outside this collectiveness. And although the story was published in the 1930s, this is an excellent book to read and also to collect. On the other hand, another dystopian technocracy is Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood. And here we encounter Snowman, a man who appears to be the last standing human after the world was kind of destroyed by a virus. And through Snowman's flashes from the past, we get to know not only many events of his past life, but also we get to see how these biotech corporations progressed throughout time and got involved in many questionable practices. And although at times Snowman presents himself as apathetic and troubled, we get to see the type of bio-experiments that led to the destruction of many species and also the world. And the reason why this book is so eye-opening is because we can see how science could be used to harm our ecosystem, especially in the hands of apathetic, unethical individuals who like to push the limits without caring for any consequences. Also, in terms of bioethics, this book gives us a clear picture of how the future may look like if we are not careful enough. In a society where human cloning is part of the medical care is Never Let Me Go by Katsuo Ishiguro. In here we see how after World War II, England developed some kind of program involving human cloning for the purpose of organ donations. And the story opens up with a group of children who grow up in an institution in charge of their care, but they're fully never told who they are or what their purpose in life is and why they have to be donors. These children have no concept of consent or decision making, and again, we see how cloning was used for specific purposes, but no one cares about anything else. And through the character's life, we get to see the frustration and bitterness in them. And in the middle of so much gloominess, the only thing they have is their indifference. You can feel how these individuals realize how disposable their existence is, and how the darkness in their circumstances provides them with no hope. This is a book that shows us not only the fragility of human life, but also the animosity of those who see themselves as untouchable, making it very eye-opening. So this is a book that you have to read at least once. And another high-end dystopia where humanity is ruled by artificial intelligence is MockingBird by Walter Tevis. In this world, machines and humans coexist since humans now only represent about 20% of the world population. And here we open up with Spofforth, a robot classified as the top and finest of his kind. But for some reason, we find him agitated, trying to jump out of a building to terminate his life. And at the beginning, I couldn't understand why he would do that, because machines like Spofforth were created to rule. But later on, I learned that he also had his own ethical dilemmas, and because he was programmed not to self-destruct, he could not end his life so easily. So even though Spofforth has accumulated power and authority, he envies human abilities and experiences for spiritual awareness and even their cycle of life and death. So the solution to stop the awakening of this awareness in humans is to suppress all forms of reading and provide them with individual contentment only by engaging in physical desires such as fast sex or through the consumption of drugs. But as expected, this is a failure because what it produces is a human's codependency on drugs and high rates of collective suicide. This was a shock because what we have here is the journey of both humans and robots seeking the awakening of a spiritual state of mind so they can stop for a moment and realize the true meaning and purpose of life despite of all the hardships and the unknowns. This book also gave us many practical examples on how things that are intended to be perfect actually diminishes our thinking capacity and harms our mental health. This book is a total gem, and even though it was published in the 1980s, I wish it would have been more popular because it is very, very interesting. And worth mentioning, since this is a very short story, is Anthem by Ayn Rand. In Anthem, we see a world that has banished all types of concepts and names. Their inhabitants are not even given proper names and also are automatically ranked by labor type. Anthem is the perfect example of a homogeneous, conformed, nameless society that embraces murkiness and ignorance to keep their inhabitants repressed. Anything that could improve knowledge or technological advancement has been prohibited and considered to be a sin. So to better yourself in this society is highly punishable. So when the main characters define the norms by seeking knowledge and questioning their lives, they have to leave the compound of the city in order to reclaim their individualism, not only by adopting individual names, but also by carving their own future. So Anthem serves us to remind us that we should celebrate our personal freedom to make decisions by having a voice and becoming the authors of our own lives. Something that we should never take for granted. And along the lines of free will and determination, we have We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. We is a world where individuality is also non-existent, and the city is confined by a separate glass wall with a benefactor that has been the ruler for at least 50 years. The government reminds its citizens that things like happiness and freedom cannot coexist, so freedom must be sacrificed for the collective happiness. And we see this philosophy wanting to be materialized by the construction of a spaceship that would take this ideology to another planet. However, this mission is at risk when one of the builders of the craft starts suffering from an awakening of his soul, leading him to all kinds of problems, forcing the benefactor to impose a mandatory surgery so all emotions and capability of questioning are erased from the inhabitants of this world. This book can be obscure and obsessive at times, but it is an excellent building block when it comes to science fiction dystopias. So if you would like to read it, pay attention to the motives behind each character's decision. And another society full of downs in a dystopian world is The Foundation Pit by Anne Andrei Platonov. And here we follow a factory worker that, after getting fired from his job, joins a group of construction workers that are working on a pit that will serve as the foundation for a housing complex for the working class. And this group of workers go through many grievances to get their job done, but as they find themselves in the middle of a political struggle between the ruling class and activist groups, they get involved in the massacre and destitution of farmers who at the time controlled the food production and land ownership. The foundation pit brings a somber symbolism with the depiction of a river of death that marks the foundation of this society as a wrongful event where not even life is respected. If the foundation is laid upon fraud and coerciveness by sacrificing the innocent and those at the bottom, the future of its participants will have no prospects, living in an immoral life without facing the consequences of their actions. In the end, not even the workers got a better fate, since the purpose of the work was tainted by the blood of the innocents. And this story has a historical prevalence in Russian history and Russian literature. So if you collect works of late 19th and 20th century, these should also be in your collection. And last but not least, I cannot come to a conclusion without mentioning one of the most studied works in dystopian fiction, and that is 1984 by George Orwell. 1984's significance comes as no surprise with the depiction of a country overtaken by force and violence, along with the lack of tolerance, media manipulation, and the disappearance of human rights. And it has been said by many scholars that the inspiration for the setting of this work was actually taken out of the state of some countries after World War I and II. So the realism here goes well beyond fiction. 1984 brings forward an unapologetic totalitarian state that operates under an iron fist in order to destroy its opponents or anyone who dares to think differently. In 1984, torture dances around as if seeking its next victim, whether guilty or not. So its inhabitants live out of fear, hatred, and in deplorable conditions. Our main character here, Winston, commits the mistake of falling in love and trusting the very man who will torture him in every possible way until he is reduced to nothing but a pile of nervousness and despair. 1984 is a true masterpiece in dystopian fiction and political science, so you should also consider reading these with Animal Farm. And we have come to the end of the video. If you have read any of these works, consider commenting and liking this video, and let us know what do you think of these societies and why in many ways they failed and failed their citizens. So until our next video, bye.